In 2020, Jaymin released Rejected, Book 1 in the Shadow Beast Shifter series. And for algorithmic reasons that no one can pin down with 100% clarity, this book blew up in 2021 on BookTube, Bookstagram, and Baby Book Talk. Asynchronistically, I was finding this book on my Amazon For You page, read it, and decided that it was worth making one of my workshop vid on. That first video blew up in 2022. I made a workshop vid on the book 2 in that series, Reclaimed. And while I liked the Shadow Beast Shifter series all on its own as like a standalone event, because those two videos ended up becoming part of my top 10 lexicon, they have a special place in my heart as something that both was helpful to me in a reading purpose and also in like a content YouTube-y kind of deal. So now that Jaymin has published a first book in a new Dragon Shifter series called Gilded Wings, it's about to release its sequel. I thought it was time to return to my roots and see if this series is another sleeper hit. The short answer here is that Gilded Wings is probably not gonna hit it out of the park like the Shadow Beast Shifter series did. Metrics-wise, Gilded Wings has a significantly more conservative reception in line with other books that Jaymin has written previously. We can see Gilded Wings has 3,340 reviews right now, and in comparison, Rejected 36,192 ratings. Even if you factor in the additional time Rejected has been published, Gilded Wings is just not on track to do the same kind of numbers. I still thought it would be a lot of fun to do a workshop vid where we looked at the good, the lukewarm, the bad, and I created a final pitch about how I would have written a story like this. Starting with the good. The real world building in Gilded Wings is excellent, which is a huge turnabout from the Shadow Beast Shifter series. We're in Maine on a coastal region where most of the people there are fishermen and are away for months at a time. Our main character Morgan and her best friend Lexi are landbound. They're both librarians or library assistant for this private library, and it's kind of described a little bit like a Newport mansion-y kind of dealio, cozy book lovers' dreams kind of elements. All of it comes together to paint a picture that feels like a real actual place. Really helps us get into the mindset of our characters. As a whole, I don't like this fantasy world, and I feel like Jaymin reversed what she did in Shadow Beast Shifters. However, this one location in the fantasy world, the Academy, feels like it's kind of a real place and has enough world building to work, be interesting, and be someplace I kind of want to hang out and learn more about. Instead of it being like a primary school or secondary school environment with class periods and rotating schedules and lunch breaks and all this other kind of stuff, we have our character doing a more individualized mentor training related to like a night school training or a night training than it is like an academic setting. And my time with Tamara Pierce and Alana the Lioness have made me love anyone training or aspiring to be a knight and going through a bunch of different physical challenges, especially if they're the underdog for some reason. And our girl Morgan is definitely the underdog. I thought some of the characters were really well done, starting with Morgan's best friend Lexi. Unlike Simone from the Shadow Beast Shifter series, Morgan's best friend Lexi is actually Fae, which means that she can continue to be relevant and continue traveling and experiencing things with her throughout the series. Always appreciate close friendships happening in what's otherwise like a fantasy romance kind of story. And surprisingly, I like the dragon shifters in this series quite a bit. I think there's about 5 dragon shifters in this series, and I'm kind of counting them all as one character right now because each one of them just has one character trait that makes them stand out as a separate person. So like there's one who's the angry one, and there's one who's like happy and kind of gambling, and there's one who's a little calmer. And visually the colors of their dragon form is different, although I can't remember if their human form was that different looking. And generally I'd rag on a one character trait only kind of person, but this is a huge improvement from how Jaymin handled the Shadow Beast and his friends in the Shadow Beast Shifter series, where they didn't really have any personality at all. Having a single trait is already better, and also the fact that each one of them only has a single trait and they're all dragon shifters and so similar created an idea for me in the workshop area that we'll talk about later. Also gives me a place to kind of like hope this story could go into where I would actually find this characterization legitimately good. And here's the other thing, I do believe all these characters are dragon shifters. They're giving me like like that dragony goodness I want. You know, like I want dragons to be possessive, to be growly, to kind of fight each other for treasures and things that they value. I want them to utilize their flying abilities and their fire breathing abilities, and I want them to be like naturally warmer than other people because they have like this fire in their chest or whatever. And I want them to be walking the line between being like more human and using reason and talking it out and being like this volatile, dangerous animal. And I realize that none of this necessarily makes for like great relationships or healthy relationships, but it does make for a fun dragon character, which is what I'm here for right now. Also, I like Astra. She is like this panthery, half like spirit animal companion thing, half character in and of herself. How intelligent she is, how much she can communicate, all that stuff is a little unclear right now. I do think potentially if she is as intelligent as the human beings and other like humanoid fae, then her portrayal is a little bit problematic. And they like kind of dip their toe into mentioning that and then like back away from it. But if she's just like slightly smarter than a dog, but not as smart as a human, like some kind of middling level intelligence, then she's a lot of fun as a character. Also, the whole idea that there is a panther-like creature that eats only fruits and vegetables and has all these predatory traits specifically to hunt and kill fae down just makes her like a lot of fun as a guardian for Morgan. So getting into a couple lukewarm elements of Gilded Wings. First and foremost is going to be our main character, Morgan. I read her as kind of like a manic pixie dream girl with almost no personality or like intense thoughts or feelings of her own. She's like a pale shadow in comparison to Mara, who's our primary character in the Shadow Bee Shifter series. Because Morgan is really lacking in like plucky resourcefulness, that fire and fight that Mara had. She kind of just like accepts that she's lesser, that people put her down, that she's just gonna be like lower on the totem pole than everybody else, sort of like an afterthought. But she's still quirky and eccentric and gonna say whatever she's gonna say. And like if you're not gonna be a physically strong character or capable character, a lot of times I expect you to have some kind of trait that makes up for it. Oftentimes it's like intelligence or observation or something like that, but Morgan is lacking in these areas as well. And I did find that especially confusing because she's 25, she's someone who's graduated college and is working in a library and loves reading. So you expect like a certain level of academic rigor from someone like that, and we're really not getting anything like that in her storyline right now. Some of this might also be a limitation of the narrative that we're telling right now because Morgan's level of absurdity is the whole reason that we stumble into the fairy realm to start with. If she was like smarter, more reasonable, her narrative wouldn't be so like manic and happenstance and like easy to flow through. Because Morgan doesn't have a lot of positive traits, you can't really follow her logic and reasoning, she often comes off as frustrating and cartoonish instead of a real person that we could empathize with and root for. Something I didn't like but is probably okay overall is going to be this first person narration. Since I'm only okay with Morgan, I don't love sharing headspace with her or seeing her perspective. I do kind of see her narration and point of view is valueless and extra words that I just don't need in my life. But also because Morgan is super clueless about this fairy realm she's going into, its history, the traitor thing that's going on, all of this larger world building stuff. She gets so much just exposition dumps, like whether it's her best friend sitting her down explaining something, whether she's in a class hearing a lecture, not really reacting to it, and where the person explaining it isn't like doing any heavy lifting either. So it might be better if we just experienced it with her, or it might be better if we had a limited third person perspective where we could give like random asides instead of like these history lectures. I don't know. I didn't like it. It felt very clunky. And maybe worst of all for me is there's this ongoing thing where Morgan describes what she looks like, what she's wearing, what her friend looks like, and what they're wearing. And it's this top-down narrative of how she sees herself or how she sees her best friend, which I don't like to start, but it becomes even weirder if you put it in a first-person narration, because then it's like,
I looked in the mirror to see my raven hair, and it was flowing just the way I liked it. I had my super smoky eyeshadow final touches on, and then there was this stunning...
It's weird. Who does this? Who is sitting here, stopping intentionally, looking in the mirror to give a take of a play-by-play of all of their features? Like, it just feels so forced and canned and hokey and like amateur writing hour essential right now. And I'm only kind of okay with the presentation of the true mate trope in Gilded Wings. So I know having like a fairy being and a human being ending up being true mates is something that Sarah J. Maas made all the rage way back in A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I've read a ton of books since then that for some reason implement this trope in a way that makes no sense to me and I never enjoy when it's on page. So just like as a general critique, fae true mate stories almost never establish that being a true mate is a thing. Like if you're looking at a werewolf shifter romance story, usually they establish the true mate trope and what that means in their society pretty early on. It's usually part of a coming age thing. It's usually something both parties feel. And it's usually something that's like immediate both people know about. And then you can choose to go with it or reject it. And it's important in these ways in their society. Fae and fairy beings don't do this because we don't start with the fact that fairies even have true mates, then suddenly having a true mate and it being a human and the fae person knowing about it and having like immediately clicked, well, the human didn't feel anything or know about it at all is really weird. It breaks the whole idea that this is a fated mate thing that both parties feel equally, which is part of the appeal of a true mate trope, right? Like that you two look at each other and this thing snaps into place and you automatically feel this way and it's momentous and you want to do something with it. When you keep it secret from the human or when the human doesn't feel that way and the fae person does, it just doesn't work for me. Very clunky and awkward and kind of like forced into there as an explanation as to why a fae person would ever be interested in a human person. And it's even more confusing because almost all these fae and human true mate stories, the fae knows about it right away and keeps it secret. The fact that it just kind of like stumbles out of the blue and then the human is mad about it. All of that's super weird and it happens in all of these tropes and I don't understand. And then if we talk about the specific potential true mate between Morgan and Draeger, or possibly a true mate trope between Morgan and Zach, both these relationships are abusive or violent in different ways where the two of them never sit down and talk. The fact that both of these dragons feel some kind of pull towards Morgan that implies that she is their true mate. And there's no preference on Morgan's side whether she'd prefer Draeger or Zach. All of this like combines to make this convoluted, confusing, and kind of imply there's no such thing as true mates. And this is like a weird thing to implement, like this is a magical predestined bond when we could just have like a standard love triangle where these two men have the hots for her and she thinks both of them are hot too. And lastly, the Chosen One journey. I'm not particularly a big fan of Chosen One stories to start. Jaymin does generally do a better job with this trope than other writers, but I don't like how much poking and prodding there's been so early into this first book about how there must be something special about Morgan. Morgan's just an ordinary human and how could this have happened if that was the case? This continual emphasis on her being normal and standard but everyone else taking notice of her and elevating her status despite this implies that there's going to be some kind of surprise reveal about her lineage or her power level and she's going to have like some kind of prophetic reason to be here that's important. It's very heavy-handed, so the combination of me not really liking this trope to start and then it being kind of like forced in my face all the time has been a little frustrating. And now diving into what's bad in Gilded Wings. So the Morgan Draeger relationship that gets set up here I feel zero investment in. And this is a huge deal because Gilded Wings is clearly trying to be a romantasy. So how these two get together is Morgan and Draeger meet each other. Morgan has the hots for him and then this fertility rite comes up and the two of them end up having a lot of steamy times for a month because of this fertility rite. It's apparently supposed to be no strings attached, but the two of them admit that they have really good chemistry together. But just in the bedroom, there's not like talking intimacy scenes, getting to know one another, getting to know what one person likes versus the other person, things that would humanize a person and make it more than just physical. So basically they spend this month having steamy times together, but they're still strangers when this is done. No conversation, no learning about each other, nothing. But somehow I'm supposed to believe that in this month of steamy times, Morgan got feelings for Draeger.
But why?
Like, people in the real world now have casual relationships with each other. And usually when people have casual relationships with each other, they get to know more about a person than just the steamy moments. Intimacy of interpersonal conversation, relation, other shared experiences, which is more than what Morgan and Draeger have. And they still part amicably. You know, they don't generally all catch feelings for each other and go into a serious relationship. That's not how these things play out. So the fact that, like, real world people have more reason to fall for each other and do it less frequently than Morgan did just leaves me completely befuddled by the dynamic and why I should be rooting for them. Especially because Draeger treats her very badly outside of this month-long steamy moment. And arguably even during this month-long steamy moment, there's some elements about it that I kind of balk at. So I literally can't relate to why Morgan feels attraction / is concerned about falling for Draeger. Guy treats her like a neglective pet, and I hate the exposition. There's so much of it in this story. The book starts off with like a full body description of both Morgan and Lexi, and then there's like a compliment party between the two of them where they argue which one is hotter. Because I hate these kind of moments, I did sort of skim the whole thing. The only thing I took away from this is that Lexi looks like she has Japanese heritage. Though we find out later that she doesn't have any Asian or Japanese heritage because she's 100% Fae from the fairy world. And I felt some kind of way about them even mentioning it. I don't remember anything about how Morgan looks, like if she's sporty or if she's curvy, what color her hair is, her eye color. And you know why? Because none of it matters in the larger narrative, and I skimmed this as fast as I could to get through it. Also, there's consistently reveals about how the Fae world is divided, how they feel that the dragon shifters are gods and what gods mean in this world. And a lot of it is like very mumbo jumbo and like chasing its own tail. So I ended up skimming a lot of it. And also there are just parts about like different Fae creatures, what they could or couldn't do, what their place was in society, how they were divided across the lands forcibly by dragons. Like, is this gonna come into play? God, I hope it's not gonna come into play because I'm gonna have to come back and reread these things, and they were dry and boring and awful. And I guess that's the other thing, is I do not respect the mythology presented in this world. Like, the Shadow Beast series has a lot of mythology I really enjoyed and thought was fun and appreciated what it was doing and why it was doing it. This mythology is so much, and it doesn't make sense. I don't like it. I don't see the reason for it or why we have it. Like, let's talk about the 30-day long sex marathon, aka the fertility rite that happens in the front third of this book. I get that this is probably a device for spice to happen in book 1 between Morgan and Draeger, but we couldn't have found a more organic or realistic way for this to happen. I mean, to have like a month-long fertility rite where your two characters just have to bang doesn't really make sense. It feels incredibly forced, and the whole it snuck up on us, so like it took Draeger by surprise too. He's not like a creepy guy taking advantage of the timing of things. He literally didn't know this was gonna happen, and if he did know, he wouldn't be around Morgan at that time. Like, what? I don't buy that. If you have a month-long fertility rite, you know when it's happening. Another issue I have with this mythology is I don't know what God means in the context of this Fae realm. They keep calling and insisting that the dragon shifters here are gods. I guess because of their power level, because everybody in the fairy realm knows that they didn't come from their realm, they fell from another, and they know that they didn't create anything. These dragons are literally just like alien conquerors. Like, when I think about gods, religion goes into that too. So there's prayer and there's ritual and there's offering and there's these other things that go with it, where really what's happening with these dragon shifters is monarchy. Offer magic the same way you might offer money for taxes. There's not like a prayer structure happening or a reverence or like a series of mythology, superstitious things that goes with them. It feels like a misuse of the term, and I was really stuck on it and bothered quite a bit. And then lastly, this story lacks any sense of stake. I think the thing I was supposed to care about is someone is trying to undermine Draeger's court. There's like a traitor. I don't know what a traitor in the court means for Draeger. And I certainly don't see how there being a traitor in one court on one of the continents in a fairy realm affects Morgan or her day-to-day life over in the human world. Like, I don't know why I'm supposed to care, and I don't know why Morgan cares. Additionally, a lot of this story doesn't tie back to the stakes as presented in the front of the book. Like, instead of this being about us going through the lands trying to find this traitor. We're stuck with Morgan, and she's like in a training montage over here, completely siloed from like the main action and proposed thrust of the story. Even when we break the story open a little bit further and we finally meet the other dragons and find out they're also chasing a traitor who might be the same traitor that Draeger's chasing down, the main bad thing this traitor has done so far in all of the realms is steal a couple of books. And it's never really like expanded upon why that would be bad. Like if there was some kind of library magic or written magic, or if these books gave secret information away, all of that could have been interesting, but we would have had to learn about that stuff instead of learning about a bunch of mundane, boring Fae history. You know, so at the end of the day, I just didn't understand why Morgan didn't try and get back to the human world and ignore all this other junk going on. Let's move into what my final pitch would be to rewrite Gilded Wings. To start, we're gonna narrate from a dual perspective, and it's gonna alternate between the best friend Lexi and our main character Morgan. We're gonna spend most of our time with Lexi though. And I chose Lexi because number one, I liked her character. She's energetic, she's fun, and she's knowledgeable. Like she knows both about the human world and about the fairy realm. And we can use her fish out of water coming to learn about the human world to sort of like explain and give us background details on the fairy realm without her out and out stating it. Also, I feel like Lexi is in a very unique and compelling situation because she is best friends with Morgan, and she's been keeping the fact that she's a Fae a secret from her all this time. So we would get a chance to like explore her guild and their reconciliation from like her perspective. And also, if we have Lexi as the primary character, her being super invested in Draeger's rule, the fairy realm, finding this traitor makes sense. And then we can like occasionally swap over to Morgan's perspective in times where Morgan is alone with Draeger. Also, Morgan says like a lot of out-of-pocket judgmental stuff about how Lexi's world runs, and it would be significantly more interesting to hear how Lexi's internally responding to that. She has both the context that Morgan has from the human realm and why humans might find their society messed up, but she also has the experience of growing up and living in this world and knowing why it's necessary. We could get a better sense of whether these leaders or dragons are messed up, or whether they're doing something that's necessary because of the nature of the Fae and the Fae realm. I know it's possible we lose some of the Morgan-Draeger relationship this way, or the Morgan-Zach relationship, but even that I feel like might be better observed from Lexi and her seeing like this unspoken passion or feeling going between the two of them. Maybe she's the one who explains to us about fated mates and how even though her friend doesn't know it, there is this mate pull between her and this man, whichever one. Or maybe she can talk about like the intensity these dragon shifters are showing Morgan is different than anything she's seen before and has these kind of implications. Next thing, I'm gonna make these dragon shifters just monarchs instead of gods. Silence so many issues I had in my head about how things are structured. Also, I'm getting rid of this fertility rite because I hate it and it's stupid. What's gonna go down is Draeger's gonna stick to his original plan of having like Morgan sit right next to him, listen to all the voices looking for the traitor. She's not gonna hear the voice, and when that happens, Draeger's gonna realize that she's gonna have to come back with him to the Fae realm. And Morgan can't live in the Fae realm for a prolonged period of time because like her energy is too weak to sustain herself there, which means that Draeger's gonna have to impart some of his own magic into her, which can only be done through steamy times. And then we can have like him and her going behind closed doors, some kind of like explanation that he gives about what's gonna happen, why it's gonna happen, and how things are gonna go down. Very similar to the fertility rite scene, except there'll be a reason he's doing it that makes sense, and a reason that it's like a casual intimacy, but maybe like surprise they find out the two of them are compatible during it or whatever. I'm cutting all the time that we spend with Draeger at his palace. It sucks. I didn't touch on it in the good, bad, mediocre because it has no bearing in the story as it stands, and I knew I was going to cut it out here. This also gives us the benefit of cutting out a large part of what makes Draeger toxic and unforgivable, so that makes him a more viable romance candidate. And it makes sense in the flow of my current story because Draeger's already kind of sampled everyone in his kingdom and realized that none of them are the the traitor. So going into the neutral territory where the Academy resides and having Morgan hear more voices there makes sense. And maybe on top of like this traitor plot, when Draeger and Morgan had their steamy time, he also realized there's potential for something more. And if he's really gonna have Morgan become his queen or mate or whatever the situation is, she needs to know about the fairy realm. She needs to know what she's getting into. So like these core base level classes also make sense. Additionally, this is going to be Lexi's first time at the academy too. I think we're going to have her homeschooled by her warrior clan and then sent off to serve Draeger when she passes whatever. And of course he sends her off into the human world, so she's never had a chance to go to the academy before, because then this better explains why Lexi is such a hardcore Draeger loyalist, because she's never been exposed to any of the other areas in her continent. So this can be kind of an awakening to her as well when she starts talking to like different factions and different fae beings who have rulers who treat their subjects differently than Draeger does her section. And the first thing we're going to learn when we hit the Fae Academy is that the human realm and the fairy realm are interconnected. So if a bad thing happens in one place, the other one feels ripples. While Morgan is studying and training at the academy, she's going to survive a couple attempted murders. This will validate that Morgan could actually help find the traitor if she lives, or it might imply that she is definitely important to Draeger and Draeger is important to this Fae realm. We could decide exactly what the attempted murder reason is later, because we're just experiencing them now. And these attempted murders might also draw the interest of the other leaders of the realm. So these other dragon shifter guys, first of all, have never seen Draeger take interest in someone before. He's never spent so much prolonged time in the neutral zone. And that kind of like draws them in and makes them more curious about Morgan and makes it less about her chosen one or being special status and more about like the circumstances surrounding her. And this way Lexi and Morgan can each get some one-on-one time with all of the dragon shifter dudes. Like all of them want to meet her separately, get to know her, build out some more characterization with these dragons. All of this we're going to have a lot of extra time for because I cut out the month of steamy time and I cut out all that long pointless time at the castle. And from here we're going to get like an especially close relationship between Morgan and Zahak. Draeger can continue to claim that it's rivalry like he does in the books, but Zahak can just seem like he values her opinions and her perspective more than the others do. Also, he'll pay more attention to her safety and give her like a little bit more consideration than any of the other dragon shifters do. And that's gonna like sort of create that possible romantic connection there. Meanwhile, Morgan and Draeger having steamy times to maintain her existence in the Fae realm period. And also because Zahak is more considerate of her, that's how he'll end up sending Astara to guard her, and that relationship will remain unchanged. And as all this stuff keeps going on, Draeger is getting more upset both with Morgan's inability to find the traitor, but also with like her blooming relationship with all of the different brothers, especially the one between her and Zahak. So he's gonna have all of them get together in one meeting to talk about boundaries, where he ends up fighting with Zahak, which is quite normal. Things will go down pretty much as they do in the book. Morgan will break up the fighting and she'll be like, hey, we've got bigger fish to fry than this right now. That's when Amorphous Big Bad is gonna come in and like separate them all out to different places. Morgan will pass out, she'll wake up with Zahak in a dark and unknown place. And the two will have to travel from like wherever they are underground, I guess, to find everybody else and reunite to face this big dark dragon thing that separated them all. If they fail, this dark thing is probably going to tear the continent apart, which will have negative repercussions on the human world. A couple spoilers for this journey I'm going to give you in my current plans. I would have each of these dragon guys literally be an aspect of a whole. And their coming together has to be like literal. Like they recombine back into one whole human being who holds all of these different aspects and depths to them. And this is part of why Morgan is attracted to all of them. And once they become one person again, that's when Morgan feels the true mate pull and they click together. Yay, happy relationship time after they defeat whatever this big bad is. I'm not gonna make the big bad be the parents like it is currently, because I think that's just too much drama, kids fighting their parents all the time. It's done and we don't need it again. But that's gonna be my final pitch for book 1 and a little bit of a peek into what I want to do in a book 2 for Gilded Wings. If you have read Gilded Wings or anything else by Jaymin, tell me what you thought about it in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading. Bye!